I'm trying to think about when people have life-changing experiences. When are some experiences in your life so big that they just shape you? They just shape you. I mean, if I were to make a personal confession, I would say Peru was that for me. You know, we went there as very young people. And truthfully, when you're in your early 20s and you live through a civil war, it changes your life. It changes your life. And when you live in a shanty town with no water, no electricity, or sometimes electricity, most of the time no water, it changes your life. And then you have to ask yourself, once you've had an experience like that, how do any other experiences ever measure up? How do they ever measure up? I know I find myself always comparing today to the extremity of what I felt back in my 20s. And I find myself, as Shelley once said, well, you know, if you said you had the biggest issue, what would you say it is? And I said, it's probably an addiction to adrenaline. If I'm not on the edge, I don't feel alive. I don't feel alive. Well, I feel like Jesus has come into an experience like this. And we've all had those kinds of experiences, but I feel like Jesus is coming right off of this kind of experience. He's baptized, he's named as beloved. He goes into the desert for 40 days, and that's got to be a life-changing experience. He fasts, he examines himself, and then he goes into this depth of understanding. What does it really mean to be beloved? And as he comes out of the wilderness, that's the text for today. That's the text for today. But when he comes out of the wilderness, he has been honed. His whole life has been honed in such a way that he now has an edge. He's got an edge. And his edge basically says, you know, repentance from temptations, whatever. He basically comes back and he says, I will not join the zealots. I will not return violence for violence. And I will not enter into this game of returning injustice for injustice. And I will not enter into this game of returning power with power. When you're feeling vulnerable, you want to get powerful and puffed up and you want to conquer the other. And he's saying, I'm not going there. He's saying, I am not going to return death for death, an eye for an eye. I am not going to engage the privileged, inhuman institutions of our society with inhumanity. I'm not going there. He's on an edge. He's on an edge. I don't know if any of you have experienced that. I bet, Carl, you did. No, I bet you did in Vietnam. That had to be an edge. I bet you experienced that edge. I've experienced that edge. When you've experienced an edge like that, there's no going back. There's no going back. You're just always on an edge. And Jesus is on the edge of justice. Jesus is on the edge of love. And now he goes and he calls some people and say, would you like to come and walk to the edge? Would you like to walk to the edge with me? And so he goes and he looks and he sees some fishermen. And the first fishermen he sees are Simon and Andrew. They have no boat. At least that's not the way it's described in the Gospel of Mark. They have no boat. So they're probably artisan fishermen. They have seine nets, and probably stones tied to the ends of them, so that when they cast them out, the stones sink, they go down, and then they pull in the fish. And they pull in the fish. Right? And so they're standing in probably waist-deep water and fishing for shallow fish. Right? They're looking for shoals of fish that come towards the shoreline, and that's what they're gathering in. Jesus calls them and says, would you like to walk to a different edge? And then he also, it says, he goes down a little bit further and he calls Zebedee, or he calls James and John, the sons of Zebedee. Now, it says Zebedee has a boat, means he's a little bit higher up, in the economic stature. He's a little higher up because he's got a boat, or at least he's renting a boat. And the truth be told, James and John and Zebedee probably aren't making that much money because Herod is taxing all the commercial fishing on the lake anyways. And he's basically taking in the profits, right? But yet he calls James and John as they're fishing with their nets in deeper water. And he says, come follow. Actually, they're mending their nets, right? They're mending their nets. And so they're probably on the shoreline. But they certainly had the experience of going into deeper water. I don't know, what is it like to go into deeper water for any of us?
Scary.
Especially when you don't swim like me. Right? Yeah, no, it's scary. It can be scary. It can be scary. Yeah. But they're going, they had the habit of going into deeper water. And it's fascinating that Jesus calls them to go into deeper, even something deeper. Even something deeper. He's calling them to go into something deeper. And yet, in order to do that, James and John have to leave their father's business. And the truth be told, when you set up a business in first century Palestine, first century Israel, you're basically saying, I expect my kids to take over the business. What do you know about your parents' expectations still today, as old as we might be? What do you know about your parents' expectations of saying, I expect you to live like this, to take over this part of my legacy? What do you know about your parents living alive and well in you and asking you, don't step out of this little space. I want you to go like this.
Those voices stay with you, that's for sure.
That voice stays with you?
Yeah.
It doesn't go away?
You might feel a little bit of rebellion.
You might even feel a little rebellion.
And they don't always listen to you.
Yeah, so here we have a mother-daughter dialogue. But what do you know? What do you know about expectations that have been placed on you? And what do you know about putting expectations on your own children?
They don't always do it like my mom said.
They don't always do it. And why might that be?
They're rebelling.
Well, maybe they're rebelling. What might else it be? They have to find their own expectations. It's called individuation. It's called finding yourself. They have to find themselves. And yes, our lessons are important, but they have to find themselves. How hard is that to let go of? How was it for you to let go of your parents' expectations?
Not easy.
No, because it stays there like a ghost, right? It's like a ghost. It's like this voice that's always talking. And yet, somewhere you had to find yourselves in your own lives, didn't you? Didn't you have to find yourselves? Well, here's Jesus calling them out of this expectation and saying, come, find yourselves in a new way. Find yourselves in a new way. What does a new way look like for any of us? sorry, Dory?
Scary, dark.
It's scary, it's dark,
Challenging.
it's challenging. And that's what we're coming to an annual meeting, and it's scary, it's dark, and it's challenging.
You have to have the will though, too.
You have to have the will.
It can also be exciting.
It can also be exciting. It's like an adrenaline rush. It's like I know that rush. I do. I know that rush. I know an adrenaline rush. You can't have an AK-47 shoved up your nose and not have one. I mean, it's an adrenaline rush. And so both brothers, and the two fishermen, these four people renounced their past expectations, and they step into something new, and Jesus, or Mark at least, calls it the good news. Calls it the good news. The good news. What goodness would you just love to hear today?
There was peace throughout the land.
That there was peace throughout the land. I would like us all just to imagine for a moment that our vocation is that of fisher people. Fishermen, fisherwomen. But we fish. We fish. I would like you to do a little act of meditation with me, to close your eyes. To go ahead and close your eyes and just to imagine for a moment being Simon or Andrew. And I would love for a moment for you to imagine these wet nets with stones on them with a rope. And I would just like you to imagine throwing them out into the water. Pulling them in. Maybe feeling the weight of a little fish. Pulling their nets in. Or maybe you're like John or James and you're in a boat and you're casting these nets out. And as you pull in that string that makes the rocks surround around the net and hold the fish in, and you feel that weight coming into the boat, I'd like you to just feel that. Feel the rhythm of casting it over and over and over again, pulling it in, bringing in something you hope for. Your sense of life. Cast it out. Bring in that which is going to create livelihood for you. And then I would simply ask you to slowly open your eyes. What are the nets you are casting out in your lives today?
Opinions, expectations.
I'm casting out opinions, I'm casting out expectations.
If the net is this community of people that I'm choosing to invite into my life and I'm choosing to invest my life into it, then I'm hoping that that net is constantly full.
I'm hoping that the net of community is constantly full. Did I hear that right? I'm hoping that the net of community that I can be part of and connected to is constantly full. I mean, what are the fish you've constantly been going after in your life up to this point?
Money.
Money,
Car, job,
cars, jobs,
houses.
houses,
Kids.
kids. I mean, what new good news do you want to cast out? What do you want to pull in?
Feed the poor. Feed the poor.
To feed the poor, or to feed my own inner poverty. oh my goodness, now all of a sudden the sign is relevant again. I mean, if this is what we long for, then why are we always chasing after the fish that don't really feed us?
Quick fix.
It's a quick fix. It's a quick fix. I was gonna make a crack, I'm not gonna go there about deflated footballs. But, yeah, but there's something deflated. You might be able to throw it a little longer, but in the end, it's just deflated. Sometimes we chase things that are just so deflated in our lives. And what does it really mean to be pumped up? What does it really mean to cast out nets of good news in any of our lives? Do we want to cast out old expectations? Do we want to live into old expectations? Do you want to just be thrown a net after money? Or do you want to have some good news in your life? Because Jesus is saying, I'm bringing you good news. And my good news is that I will not return injustice for injustice. I will not return violence for violence. I will not return hatred for hatred. But I will return love with love. I will accept you, and I will come into this fullness of being that happened in my baptism when I was called beloved.